The FFPC Playoff Challenges are back for another season. Just pick 12 players, one from each playoff team, and ride them all the way to the big dance. It's that simple. Over $1.8 million is on the line between the two contests exclusive.
Welcome in to the January 9th, 2025, Thursday edition of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. So glad to have you aboard because this is an important week for fantasy football, and we are going to break everything down that you need to know for the playoffs, including everything you need to know for the world-famous FFPC Playoff Challenge. Hi, hello, and welcome. My name is Eric Balkman. You know me from the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, and, of course, the Fantasy Football Players Championship at myffpc.com. I want to welcome in my co-host. Welcome back to the show, the waiver wire queen. She does it all during the season for Legendary Upside. You follow her on the X at Steph Miller 57. Steph Miller, Happy New Year. How are you?
I'm doing great. Happy New Year's.
It's always good to end the season on a bang. And we're going to try to end the season with a huge bang tonight as we are going to try to assemble a $500,000 winner in the FFPC World Famous Playoff Challenge. Again, if you want to play in this, you can do so at myffpc.com. There's two different contests there. You can jump in for $35, have a chance at $100,000, or you could jump in for $200 and win up to $500,000. There's no draft or no salary cap. These lineups are easy to put together. You're picking a 12-team lineup for the entire duration of the playoffs. You don't have to mess around with it during the postseason. Once your lineup is set and that first wild card game between the Chargers and Texans kicks off on Saturday, hopefully you're not ticked off about it, that will be your lineup for the entire postseason. Total points, double points for anybody who makes it to the Super Bowl on your roster. Only one player per team. If you want Justin Herbert, you can't have J.K. Dobbins. If you want C.J. Stroud, you can't have Nico Collins, that kind of thing. That is the slant with this. Register now, myffpc.com. I just sent out an email to the FFPC subscriber list. We are just over half full for both contests, which is ahead of last year's pace. And I believe last year's both contests ended up selling out. So make sure you're getting in right now. Scan the QR code that our producer, Matt Deutsch, has put up at the bottom of the screen. myffpc.com is where to go. Enter now. And hopefully you can make this a fantasy season to remember still, which is always good. You think fantasy is over. It's not. You still got a chance at a $500,000 grand prize. Steph, before we move on to the playoffs, I want to ask you, how was your personal fantasy season this year? How did 2024 treat you?
It treated me pretty well. I got one of our ship chasing teams got to the sprint. So we had a couple teams come close and have, some tough defeats. They had the 3rd and 4th seed, so we had some close trying to win our league there that didn't quite pan out. But, I'm back for a little more, and, you still get some money when you have those top seeds. So it was a nice season.
Remind the viewers and the listeners for Legendary Upside, legendaryupside.com, where you are putting together that waiver column throughout the year. This was pretty extensive work that you do throughout the season. When does that column normally come out? Is that a Wednesday thing that you normally come out with, or is it earlier than that? I can't remember, honestly.
Sometime usually like Tuesday night, pretty much whenever I finish it.
Right.
Which a lot of times it will extend over, it will probably come out sometime in the middle of the night. And yeah, it's mostly really heavily based for the high stakes for the FFPC. Mm-hmm. So it's not your typical waiver column. I go super deep into the player pool as well. I also will talk a little bit of strategy and other things that are unique to the contest in there. I do have home league stuff also in the waiver column for people, but that's really kind of the specialty focus, trying to get that niche.
Which is great, because I know as a guy who plays in a lot of high stakes leagues, I am always because shout out to all the content producers out there. You're doing yeoman's work. We appreciate it. We love it. But I think a lot of them have gone to, I shouldn't say a lot of them, a significant amount of them. When you read waiver columns, they're dedicated to 10-team leagues or shallow 12-team leagues. and that doesn't really help me. But if you're playing in the FFPC or I play in the KFFSC, I play a ton there. You're talking about 20-man rosters, 12-team leagues. So when I get to see your column and I see how deep it goes, there's actual tangible information and, as you pointed out, strategy on how to manage your waiver wire budget, which players to target, which players to fade. And it really helps me manage a team at the high stakes level, which I don't think there's a lot out there. And I'm glad you're doing it. Please don't ever stop. Because we need this as high-stakes players going forward. Are you excited for the season to be done so you don't have to toil on that column every single week?
I mean, it's nice to have a little break, I mean, because it's a lot of work. And, it's a pretty small deadline from watching the games to writing everything up and, going through and looking at all the snap counts and, usage and trying to unearth all of those little gems that nobody else is seeing and figure out and fine tune what I think the price is going to be, because I try to give also recommendations for all of that. And then I go back and I show people what I bid and won. And so I try to be really transparent as well and make it fun to kind of follow along with the teams that we have.
Transparency is always great, which is fantastic. I think as a content producer, you probably understand, like, there's going to be people you are competing against that will be using your own advice against you. And that's got to be frustrating.
It can't be. I mean, but I think that's anybody that does content, you
right,
realize,
exactly. Yeah.
People that stream drafts, especially like some of those 30-second clocks, and then they got people in the room sniping them right and left. I mean, it's just something you kind of got to learn. You want people consuming your content. You just got to think of it as a honor and outwit them.
So tonight on the show, we are going to be discussing primarily the world famous FFPC Playoff Challenge. For those of you who are not playing in it, number one, check it out, try it. I promise you, I shouldn't promise you. Maybe you'll hate it. I don't know. Maybe it's not for everybody. This is a horrible endorsement, but I'm just speaking from the real, being honest with you. The majority of the people I talk to who play in it come back every single year. So that's the best endorsement I can give. It is a lot of fun. And if you never tried it, definitely try it out, because that will be the majority of the advice we're giving tonight. The majority of content that we're producing is all dedicated to this specific challenge. We've broken the show up into 3 parts tonight. First segment, Steph and I are going to analyze what you need to be doing with each team in the AFC. Second segment, same thing, but we're going to tackle the NFC. And then in the final segment, I'm going to put together a lineup. Steph's going to put together a lineup, and undoubtedly one of them will win the $500K. As an employee of the FFPC, I can't enter mine, so feel free to dupe my lineup. I'm usually good for a middle-of-the-road average finish in this thing. If I go back and look at what I've released on my shows in the past, I've never had one that's been right up there, but maybe this will be the year. And as the better boss is pointing out, he was so bad in fantasy football this season, it is now time to win it all back. This is the equivalent of when you're playing poker at night with your friends, and you're just playing low stakes, and then about 11:30, midnight, when the pillow comes calling, everybody's like, all right, let's do one more hand, and everybody just shoves everything in that they have in front of them, and it just all comes down. This is kind of what this is, because no matter how bad or good your fantasy season was, you could win $500,000. So think about this. Could be, I've had those seasons. Steph, you've probably had those seasons where you get done with it, you're like, what was I doing this year? God, it just turned out so bad. But in the span of a month, if you hit this right and you run pure, $500,000 could be yours. And we're going to try to make one of our viewers one of the winners this week. Okay, so let's go to the AFC. I want to kind of do this quasi game by game. We're going to bounce around. We're going to start with a team that is not playing this week, but seemingly always has a hand in who wins this challenge every year, and that's the Kansas City Chiefs. For years, we have seen 2 players primarily owned in this Kansas City Chiefs championship window team. They've been Patrick Mahomes and they've been Travis Kelce. Steph, when you look at some of the other electric quarterbacks that we'll talk about tonight, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, to name a couple right off the bat, do you think Patrick Mahomes might actually be under-owned in this competition, and knowing that they're the number 1 seed and the favorites to get to the Super Bowl, to the AFC? Are we not talking about Patrick Mahomes as our quarterback option enough? Non-Superflex, you can only pick one quarterback, but nobody really talks about Patrick Mahomes being their quarterback. Should we be talking about that and considering him?
I mean, if you take Patrick Mahomes, I think this year you're going to be getting very different. Like, I don't think he's going to get owned at all. It's going to be mostly the rushing quarterbacks that people really gravitate towards, just because we've seen those scores get so high. And Mahomes hasn't had the best season, like fantasy-wise, if you look at his stats. He has not been a league winner. So regardless of the fact that he's got the highest odds to make the Super Bowl, people still don't want to play him. I think Kelsey far and away is going to be the highest owned Chief and one of the highest owned players in the entire contest.
So I went back and shout out to Fantasy Mojo, Darren Armani, fantasymojo.com. Anytime we cite statistics like this for the FFPC, it's always due to his website. And if you are a high stakes player, highly recommend getting a subscription to fantasymojo.com. He will tell you, oh, it's mostly just stuff you want to get in the draft season. No, you want to subscribe for the in-season stuff. And then obviously the playoff challenge stuff. So just looking at this last year, in the world famous FFPC Playoff Challenge, Patrick Mahomes was owned in 3.4% of leagues. That was it. Once again, I shouldn't say once again. Last year, it was the two guys I mentioned. Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen made up 75% of all rosters in this competition. Everybody had 75% of all the teams had one of those guys. The Patrick Mahomes pivot could work this year. I would say that it was probably more likely to work last year because he is down a little bit. The Chiefs have changed the way that they move the ball down the field and the way that they're winning games this year. So I am less convinced that Mahomes could be the guy this year. But when you talk about not wanting to have a chalky lineup, having Mahomes in as your quarterback over Jackson, over Allen, it's really compelling. This is not a guy who is the quarterback on a 5 seed, a 6 seed. He's the 1 seed, and you want to have those double points in the Super Bowl. That is my case for Mahomes. Let's move on to his backfield mate in Isaiah Pacheco. Now, Pacheco is going to be contending for carries and touches with Kareem Hunt back there and Carson Steele, and there's a whole cavalcade of guys. Pacheco is a guy that I think some people shy away from, and this will be a recurring theme tonight. People will shy away from him in the season-long game because he runs with no respect for his body. He does not protect himself on the field, and it causes him to hit the injured reserve. God, I'm in baseball mode already. Cause him to hit the injured reserve list, which had happened again this year, and Kareem Hunt took over. This would be an uber fade of Mahomes and Kelsey if we're going to go to Pacheco. But bear in mind, Steph, 38% of teams in this challenge last year had Pacheco. You think that number is going to be right around 38% again this year? I think it might be lower.
We actually, over at Legendary Upside, Pat Crane does ownership for this contest every year that we have available for subscribers on our site. So I took a look at some of these numbers previous. We have Pacheco owned for, I think, 1%.
1%?
I mean, think about it.
Hold on. This is the projected for this year, right?
For this year.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Keep going, please.
So, I mean, you got to think about it. And it's like, it's hard sometimes when you take these projections, to just hear them in isolation. But, you know, when you put it through of how the whole teams and people are probably likely to choose, because, you know, it's like one little piece affects everything else.
Right.
You know, he hasn't gotten full snaps. He hasn't looked like himself off of injury report, you know, coming back this season. He hasn't had any big games. And, you know, Kareem Hunt hasn't gone away, and Samaje Perine could work in. I mean, it just doesn't feel like a comfy click at all. And there's a lot of really good, strong running back plays that people would rather go to, and even pivots, you know. I just, again, Kelsey's probably the highest owned, one of the highest owned players we have on the whole slate. Even though he hasn't had his normal season, I think that he still just feels comfy, and people think he always pulls it off in the playoffs, and it should happen again.
And that's the thing. Like, and you bring this up, like, you know, just because he has not had his normal season, it's still a pretty awesome season for tight ends. And I think that I'll leak into this topic real quick because I think it's been we've talked about it to death, including with Cullen Hoffman. Steph, thanks so much for hanging out with us on Tuesday night on the Road to High Stakes Lowdown. Cullen's in the chat right now, the 100K winner from last year, and I got a chance to talk to him about his thoughts on this. And we did talk about Kelsey. The thing with Kelsey is with Brock Bowers not in the playoffs, with Trey McBride not in the playoffs, that's two huge cogs of the regular season tight end core that were, made up 2/3 of the elite tight ends this year, and they're out. So Kelsey, to me, is like when you got to fill one spot with tight end here, and Kelsey, I think you're right. I think you and Pat are right that he is going to be the most owned Chief, but the Kansas City does give you the opportunity to pivot. If you wanted to go not with Pacheco, not with Mahomes, not with Kelsey, but if you wanted to go with a receiver, is there enough upside with DeAndre Hopkins? Is there enough upside with Marquise Brown? We know Xavier Worthy has the explosive playmaking ability on his side, so I can see that. How do you look at those trio of receivers for Kansas City for this competition?
Well, I think that DeAndre Hopkins and Hollywood Brown are not going to be owned at all. First of all, Worthy will be lower owned, but he'll probably be the most popular, I think, of the three, and for good reason, in my opinion. I have a hard time getting to D-Hop because I do think that they are going to increase his role, it looks like, in the postseason, but still he hasn't gotten there. It does look like maybe Hollywood is in that Rashee Rice role. So that's a little appealing to me. But Worthy I do like as the pivot. That's probably my favorite one. He's still going to be low enough owned to make it a really good pivot. He's started running, 90+% of the routes these last couple of weeks. I think it's been 80% for a while now. He's getting a big target share. And they were talking a lot about when Hollywood came back, it allowed Worthy to play the role they drafted him for. So he was kind of almost playing out of position for a lot of the year, as well as we always see talented rookies start to earn more opportunities a lot of times down the stretch. And especially the Chiefs are one of those teams that are known for not playing their rookies all the way, earlier in the season, that a lot of times they do increase the role. So, I mean, we see the explosion there, and we've seen him get rush attempts, catching those touchdowns. I mean, they want the ball in his hands. So that, to me, makes the most sense. But if you wanted, like I said, to get a 1%er again, or maybe a 0%er, Hollywood would probably be the next guy I would pick.
It's so wild because I'm looking at the ownership percentages for the Kansas City receivers last year, and it's guys who are not. It's Marquez Valdez-Scantling. It's McCole Hardman. It's Rashee Rice. Guys that are not playing in the postseason this year for Kansas City. The highest owned of those three guys, Rashee Rice, was 10% owned last year. I don't know if Xavier Worthy gets to that high, but I think in that neighborhood.
That's about what we have.
There you go. Over at Legendary Upside, where you can check out these projections for ownership in the FFPC Playoff Challenge. The first game on Saturday, and this is the game that's going to cause all those lineups to lock, is the Houston Texans hosting the Los Angeles Chargers. Let's talk about the Texans first. How do you feel about their chances of not only winning this game, but maybe winning a second game? Do you think that this is it for them? And if that's the case, are we looking at just Kaimi Fairbairn or the Houston Texans defense in this one? Is this one of the, quote, soft fades that we're looking at that we have to do for at least two teams in this competition, Steph?
I mean, I think that's how most people are going to look at it, far and away. So a quick way to get, because, the spread isn't that big here. So, no. I mean, I do think that there could be an upset. And if you wanted to play it that way, it makes sense to play one of the skilled players instead of soft fading. And I think that will be, again, a way to get slightly unique. Now, I think they could win this game. I don't see them winning more than one personally. I think that's a little far-fetched. But that doesn't mean that we've seen there be the guy you need in week one in some of these contests, and Nico Collins could definitely be a guy that you need. People think just because he hasn't scored in a while that now all of a sudden he can't. He still can.
Are you concerned because him scoring, obviously CJ Stroud goes into that, right? And Stroud has taken a step back this year from his production levels. Is he going to be good enough against a really good Chargers defense, by the way? We want to talk about the Chargers defense enough. Is he good enough to keep Nico Collins relevant where if the Texans go out in the first round, you're going to have like a 15-point score from your Texan of choice here? Because that'd be mine. I'd rather have Collins over Mixon. I looked at some of these rosters over the last 3 years. The winning ones usually are wide receiver heavy, which kind of surprised me. I thought they'd be more running back heavy, but they're actually been wide receiver heavy. Is Collins the guy over Mixon? And how confident do you feel about making Collins your Houston Texan of choice?
I definitely do think that if I'm going to pick a skilled player, my preference is Nico. I mean, Mixon's coming off that high ankle sprain, and he just hasn't looked very good, And like you say, the Chargers are a really good defense. Mm-hmm. So I don't see necessarily them just running him into the ground. Maybe it's a back and forth game if they're, hanging tight with the Chargers or something, and it's just a little higher scoring than we think, or at least closer, which is already kind of predicted. So I would do that. I like Fairbairn quite a bit, but I think that's going to be a pretty popular play as well because this is one of the few dome games we get. So people want the kicker in a better environment as well when they're looking at those fades,
Yeah, the dome game. So this is the dome game. The as of right now, the Vikings Rams, that's at SoFi, that's inside. And then I thought there was one more, or am I making this up? Maybe that is just it. Those are the two dome games of the opening of the okay. All right, yeah, because Tampa, Philly, Buffalo, Baltimore, they're all outside. Okay. And the total on this too, only 41 points. So maybe not a lot of scoring, but I think Fairbairn is going to be a pretty popular guy. Last year, Nico Collins was owned in 36%, and Fairbairn was the kicker for 24% of the FFPC players in this. Okay, so that's the Texans. Their opponent is going to be the Chargers. Now, I think the most chalky play here, and maybe the correct play, is going to be Ladd McConkey. This guy has got, I don't know what it is, Steph, like 8 games, 9 games, 10 games in a row of at least 50-plus receiving yards. The floor is there, and we saw the ceiling in Week 17 as well when he went crazy with the 2 touchdowns. Should have been 3 touchdowns that game. But he is not, he should not, I mean, we'll see what happens. He is probably not going to touch the ball as much as J.K. Dobbins. Dobbins is riskier. Now, he did get some rest on IR, obviously, when he was hurt. Is he worth the risk over Ladd McConkey, or is it McConkey or bust here for you between those two players?
I mean, for me, it's probably Ladd or bust, personally, just because I think, maybe J.K. can do it for one game, but if you're playing them to win and going on, I don't think they're not going to be favored. So
right.
It's going to be hard to ride him past just one game. So, and Ladd's just, I mean, getting tons of work. And now we have QJ is questionable. Yeah. So, I mean, I do think it's interesting to maybe flip it and do kicker or defense for LA and do the skill player for Houston, as again, you can always look for ways to get different just within a game. Not even the player, just how you're attacking it or looking at it and going the opposite way can be something. Because it's not just straight ownership. Sometimes it's pairings as well. So, just getting that unique combination or a more unique combination is another interesting way to attack this.
I think I think the most fascinating thing, if you're looking at a skill position player for the Chargers this weekend and beyond, Josh Palmer has been ruled out. He is not playing in this game. Tom Pelissero, to your point, Steph, earlier this afternoon, said that Quentin Johnston on the final injury report is listed as questionable with a thigh illness or a thigh/illness. I hope it's thigh/illness because whatever a thigh illness is, I don't want to have that. That sounds awful. He caught 13 balls for 186 yards in week 18. I still am not sure if that was real life, but apparently it did happen. He gets 55 catches on the season, 711 yards, and he did get into the end zone 8 times. This was an interesting pivot after what we saw in week 18. It becomes a lot less interesting if he can't go. Now, you do have the added benefit of inactives coming out 90 minutes before lineups lock in this competition. Let's say he's active. Is he worth a pivot? Maybe not in the $200 contest, maybe in the $35 contest, where you would think about Quentin Johnston over Ladd McConkey.
I mean, like you said, the $35 contest is a lot bigger. So it's one of those, if I had a very chalky lineup or a lineup where every play was safe and I just wanted to kind of do one giant pivot, some of that makes sense. Also, if I had a lot of teams, it depends on if I have one team that I'm going for, or if I have more of a portfolio, for a lot of these decisions. Because sometimes you don't have to get ultra weird and go really deep into them to, if we look at like the winning lineup last year, it wasn't weird. It was more just playing on a player on a team that people were not betting on to make it through. So, sometimes just looking at different scenarios can get you different enough. But if you wanted to make just one extreme pivot, I mean, that's definitely viable. I mean, we've seen him do it, even though, QJ, how many times he can catch the ball in a row for multiple games is always a question. But he's got the big play. I mean, he's a big play threat. That's what we always thought he was going to be. And was this breakout for real? I don't know. My dynasty team with him.
That was the one thing I was looking at when I was watching week 18. I'm like, what is this performance going to do to Quentin Johnston? Because it's not like he's on a team with like Jahmyr Gibbs and Jameson Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta. He's on a team that doesn't have a ton of big time skill position players, with the exception of Ladd McConkey. They don't have an elite tight end. They don't have an elite running back. They're probably not going deep into the playoffs. At least I wouldn't think. Excuse me. With where you would choose your quarterback. So he's in a really fortunate position where I think that we will see some interesting ownership in the $35 competition for the FFPC Playoff Challenge. Shout out to Ann Dunn, who hopped aboard on YouTube. Balky, Steph, what I miss? Oh, nothing. Just the Chiefs, Texans, and Chargers. We're going hard with the rest of it. And Nick Costantino, one of the back-to-back champions of the Go Bills franchise in the FFPC main event, chiming in as well. When has Mixon ever looked good? He has been kind of a whipping boy in fantasy circles for the majority of his career, which is, one of those. I guess, Steph, I can't speak to you. I had never drafted Joe Mixon and been like, oh, I'm super psyched for this pick. Like, it's usually like he falls to me and like, okay, the slide has ended. We gotta pick him up here.
Yeah, I've never been a big Mixon bull, but I mean, somehow he gets there, even though he's not very good, in my opinion. I mean, when we look, he still somehow gets there.
Let's get there on Saturday night in Baltimore. Ravens hosting the Steelers. Lamar Jackson, one of the most owned quarterbacks in this competition last year, has had a bit of a bugaboo. Excuse me, I am getting way too emotional tonight. I'm getting verklempt talking about this playoff challenge. I don't know what it is. Lamar Jackson has not always been the best guy in the postseason. Now, we know what he can do in the regular season. He's won the MVP multiple times. Is this the postseason where you can trust him? I have heard smarter people than me say this is Baltimore's year. This is the year they get to the big dance. And if they do get there, obviously you want a Raven on your team, and it's probably going to be Lamar Jackson or Derrick Henry. That'd be my guess. I'm sure the legendary upside projections would have something similar, but I'll check them out just to make sure. Lamar Jackson, is this the year, Steph? I mean, I think we could be pretty aggressive with a player like him in 2025.
I mean, the Ravens look really good. They have really good strength. If you look, they have good odds to make the Super Bowl. But the thing is, if they win the first round and the Bills win the first round, they're likely to face each other. Yep. They're going to be playing each other in the second round.
In Buffalo.
And I mean, in Buffalo, and I saw Nick's in the chat. I don't want to be talking bad about the Bills here. So But I mean, both of those teams I could see easily making a run. I mean, that would be a toss-up. But I think Lamar's going to be the second highest owned quarterback to that point, for sure. If he could pull it off now, I do worry a little bit more now that we know that Flowers is going to be out like the first round. But maybe they just rush it more. Maybe, they just lean on Lamar more. But he seems, I mean, he's on fire right now. He could definitely make a run and, have it be their year.
I'm just looking at this.
I like him.
And he was, to your point, the most owned quarterback in this challenge last year. 41% of FFPC players had him. The next closest, Josh Allen, at 34%. And some crazy son of a gun had Mason Rudolph. One person rostered Mason Rudolph as their quarterback in this challenge last year. God, I love it. It's so much fun to talk about. You mentioned Zay Flowers. We know he's out this round. Will he play next week? I don't know. I would imagine his status is going to be up in the air. What do you do with Zay Flowers, knowing that this is a Pro Bowl receiver for Baltimore? Baltimore receivers don't make the Pro Bowl. That just doesn't happen. So he's kind of a unicorn. And you want unicorns on your team, but you don't want unicorns that are hobbling along on 3 legs on your team. What about Zay Flowers in this competition? How do we handle it knowing he's missing at least the first game?
I mean, this is I don't have those type of guts in this contest to make that play personally. Again, I guess if you had a huge portfolio and wanted to punt it off on one and take that risk, but it's a big risk because we don't know that much about what even the exact injury is, the timeline. It's been week to week. It's, here or there. They're not being very forthcoming. So I don't really have a good educated guess as to if he'll be back. Maybe my feeling is more if they're going to try their best to make it through without him. And then if they make it to the Super Bowl, put him out there. But then we still don't know. Would he be just more of a decoy? Would he actually get his normal, thing of routes, how effective he's going to be? I don't think that it's worth the risk in this contest. Again, you can go to a lot of these secondary players when you look at ownership, have 1% ownership already, something crazy low, 3, 4, under 10% without, the risk of not playing it in these games.
I'm kind of with you. I always say I'm a weak man, right? And Zay Flowers, how disappointed would you be if you roster him knowing he's out this week and then you find out he's out the following week? And then what if they lose to the Bills? Then that's it. And you get a 0 for that. Even if they bring him back for the Super Bowl, worst case scenario, Baltimore's got to get there. We just don't know his role. And that injury looked awful, looked absolutely terrible when I saw it. And I don't know, are they playing games? Is there some gamesmanship going on here with how serious the injury is? Possibly. Joe King points out in the chat, Rashad Bateman, Isaiah Likely calling to him. Would Bateman and Likely be calling to you, knowing Flowers is going to be out at least the first round, and knowing that that it is a dominant run game that Baltimore has, and they have Mark Andrews, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But specifically about Bateman and Likely, how interesting of a Baltimore pivot do those two players make for you, Steph?
I think Bateman would be my choice if I was picking between those two, because it looked like when we saw Zay leave the game that Bateman definitely stepped into the number 1 receiver role. And he hasn't gotten a lot of target volume, but he's been very efficient on it. And he's looked good this year, like as he's come back, and I would expect him to have the bigger role, and I don't think people are going to go there. Likely it's a little harder for me because I would take Andrews. I think we've seen Andrews come on again later in this year. But if you wanted to, I guess, punt tight end, it's just one of those, again, I don't think you need to get that far down and that cute. But if you wanted to totally punt tight end, I mean, I guess you could.
Yeah, and it could be, I guess I get a little bit more conservative when I see stuff like this. I'm in the $35 version, I would be more likely to take on Bateman, more likely to take on Likely, for lack of a better word. But if I'm only firing a couple of bullets, I just don't know what's going to happen with Baltimore with these other guys. You know who I do know is going to perform? Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews, Derrick Henry. And I feel much more comfy, cozy with those guys. And to your point, Steph, I think you brought this up before too. You don't have to get all that weird with these competitions in order to win a six-figure grand prize. You look back on some of these winning lineups, and I think that a lot of the reaction was, really? Out of all the teams, that's the one that won? Yeah, you can have a lot of chalk and still win. Mark Andrews, I want to talk about him just real briefly before we switch over to Pittsburgh. He has caught a touchdown, I believe, in 6 straight games. Touchdowns are not a sticky stat, and yet Mark Andrews just seems to be the Velcro to the football. He in the end zone. He is making it happen there. Are those performances in the red zone for him over the last month and a half of the season enough for you to say, yeah, I'll take him as my tight end, or maybe just take him as a flex?
I mean, yeah, I think he's one of the best pivots off of Kelsey there is in this contest, because it's a huge, again, ownership discrepancy between, like I said, Kelsey and Andrews. And Andrews is probably, arguably, most people would say, the second best tight end if we're looking at these remaining teams, you know? So to get that type of discount is already going to make you very different. And he's going to be the third lowest player on his team, I think, owned as well, because we're going to have Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry with a lot more ownership. So that alone is going to make you unique, just getting him into your lineup there. And I think they're using him in the red zone. That's not going away. I mean, we've seen this over the years. This isn't just this year. I mean, they target him in the red zone and he scores touchdowns, and he's going to get more targets with Zay out. He's been getting more targets, I think, as he's gotten healthier. I don't know how healthy he was earlier in the season. So I think that even if he doesn't just continue to score those touchdowns, I mean, this is PPR, tight end premium scoring. He could still get you there. And again, if you're looking at the competition at that position, maybe not within the team there, we have, Lamar and Henry score a lot, but just within tight ends, it's pretty easy for maybe Kelsey not to get there. And it'd be very hard for most of the other tight ends to come up and match. So you could still dominate that position, even, and then hope other guys at other positions can still match, even if he's not the highest on his team. So there's a lot of different ways you can look at some of these, your chances and how these contests play out. Like I say, it's all a puzzle. It's like one decision leads to another decision to another. And that's where you start to realize that you don't have to get that different. It's more if you just kind of change your mindset and how these pieces fit together, you can get unique as well.
We just talked about Kaimi Fairbairn being one of the kickers that is going to be kicking indoors for the first round of the playoffs. He is now the only kicker that will be kicking indoors, is the NFL just releasing a statement less than 2 minutes ago. Quote, in the interest of public safety, Monday's Vikings-Rams wildcard game has been moved from SoFi Stadium in Inglewood, California to State Farm Stadium, the home of the Arizona Cardinals. So that game is still going to go off on Monday. It's still going to go off at its 8 o'clock Eastern scheduled time. However, it will now be played in Arizona as opposed to Los Angeles. More to come on that when we tackle the NFC, but I wanted to make everybody aware right now that that game, no longer in Los Angeles, it's going to be in glorious Glendale, Arizona. And boy, shout out and thoughts and prayers to everybody in the Palisades area that are losing their homes and just, trying to stay safe right now. Scary stuff that's going on there right now. So once again, Vikings, Rams, going to be in Arizona. We'll get into that coming up in the next segment. I want to talk about a few more teams before we get out to a break. Pittsburgh, I don't know. Maybe this is a quick conversation with you, Steph, because they are underdogs in this game, the 6th seed in the playoffs, but they are a team that has played Baltimore relatively tough and beat Baltimore several times over the last couple of years, or last few years, I should say. So I don't think we could take it for granted. A lot of people will just pick the defense or pick Chris Boswell, who's been unbelievable this year. But if we were going to go with a skill position guy, would you consider Najee Harris? Would you consider Jaylen Warren, knowing how involved Warren is in the passing game? And this could be a game where Pittsburgh has to dump off and throw a lot. to keep up with Baltimore in the second half of the game. And Najee Harris, a guy who I think put up 1,000 rushing yards again this year, quietly, and it's not the most exciting guy, but dude puts up numbers. You like Harris or Warren in a challenge like this?
I do not. Not against Baltimore's rush defense. I mean, first, for Najee, they would have to have a big lead. And I don't see that happening in this game. Now, I'm not saying they can't possibly win, but I think if they do, it would be on the back of some of those moon balls. And so the guy I would go for is George Pickens. So that would be how, and it's a much better matchup for wide receivers against Baltimore to that point as well. So connecting on some of those deep balls could be, the key. I think more. Warren would be slightly more interesting just because you mentioned, he catches the passes, PPR scan a little bit. But I still don't think those little dump offs are going to do it to win a game. And you really want either a guy that's going to put up a massive score in round one if they go out and lose, or, you're betting on using those skill players for teams you think can advance. So to me, I think that Pickens has the ceiling that you would want for if you were going to be different and pick a player that could only, last in round one. And, if there was an upset, then great. You could have somebody that can score you a lot of points for another
Let me
game.
throw this at you. And you talked a lot about Pickens, and I get it. And I think Pickens is a fine choice for Pittsburgh if you want to go that way. But let me throw this at you. Let's say you're projecting a Pittsburgh upset. So you're betting that Pittsburgh gets at least two games in this competition. PPR, tight end premium. How do you feel about Pat Freiermuth in that scenario, knowing how involved he's been in this offense down the stretch?
I think the Freiermuth is an interesting pivot just because the tight end position is not that strong this year, like outside of Kelsey. And if you want to get away from that chalk, it's pretty hard. Like that's kind of why I was saying earlier, I like Andrews so much. I mean, he makes the most sense, Freiermuth is on my short list for guys that if I was considering making a little bit of a tight end pivot possible. Now, I don't think he's going to necessarily put up the same type of score, but it's kind of one of those things of maybe making it almost a little more of a soft fade.
Yeah.
Again, would be my way to attack it. I think if I'm playing them to win, I would be riding Pickens personally. I think doing the tight end, I'm still not playing for them to make a big run.
Freiermuth, and I guess this is my recency bias taking over. His last two games of the year were his best two games of the year. 7 for 60 against Kansas City, 8 for 85, and a touchdown against the Bengals in Week 18. If you look at what he did in the two Baltimore games this year, 2 for 14, 3 for 16. That is 5 for 30 in two games. No bueno. And that's the first opponent that you have is the Steelers. I'm with you. I think if you're not going to use Boswell, you're not going to use the defense, Pickens would be the way I would go here. Moving on to Buffalo, the Nick Costantino portion of the show. And by the way, Nick said he's got a beef with Appleton being the home of fantasy football. Appleton, Wisconsin, my hometown, which not only features Cullen Hoffman, who won the $100,000 in the playoff challenge last year, but Mike Melberg, who won the $1 million in the FFPC main event this year. Unbelievable. Now, not to take anything away from Nick, because his Go Bills franchise won $500K and $1 million in back-to-back years in the main event. Buffalo's huge. He said some of his Buffalo buddies finished 6th place overall this year. Yes, I realize Buffalo's huge, and it's coming. It's 4 times the size of Appleton. Let us Appletonians have our moment here because it fades quickly. So Nick, thank you for your input. We always appreciate it. Thanks for watching tonight. Is Josh Allen too chalky in this competition? Josh Allen, who I believe is now the odds-on favorite to win the NFL MVP. And one of the things working for him, if you want to roster him, there is no Stephon Diggs on this team this year. Dalton Kincaid has not developed into the player that we thought. Khalil Shakir is fine, but is he really that explosive type play that could help you, shoot to the top of the leaderboard? I don't think so. So it comes down to Josh Allen and James Cook. Number one, would you be willing? Well, here's the thing. if you're firing one bullet or multiple bullets, I think most people would have Josh Allen as their quarterback. James Cook, is he the only guy that you see is worth a pivot off of Allen for the Bills? Let's get into this stuff.
For me, he is. Because here's the thing. We see he spreads the ball around. So if it's hard to have one of those pass catchers that is getting there for multiple games. And I mean, I do think they're playing, obviously, at least 2 games with the Bills. So it's really hard to bet on somebody else because there's not an alpha, someone. And most of the time, even with those pass catchers, Allen's coming along. Like, it's hard to envision a scenario where he's not the highest scoring player on that team by a wide margin. So there's no opportunity cost there. The only scenario I can see where he isn't is if it's a James Cook game. So that's why he makes sense as that pivot. Now, I will say the other running backs have worked in more. So we've seen some risk there. I honestly, especially if I'm just playing 1 or 2 lineups, I'm probably eating the Allen chalk just because there's nobody else I really want on that team to that extent. And I'm confident in my own skills to get different elsewhere. I just think that we've seen the scores he puts up, what he does with his legs. And I do think he has a good chance to make the Super Bowl where you get those double points. And I mean, he could just separate in a way that nobody else can. And there's not an opportunity cost there to do it. Where when you look at, Lamar or Hurts, you got Derrick Henry, you got Saquon Barkley, you got these alpha wide receivers, or at least secondary decent wide receivers, or tight ends. And you don't have any of that because I'm sorry, Kincaid has not shown to be that, even though we had hopes for him entering the year.
Let's spend a couple of minutes on Buffalo's first round opponent, the Denver Broncos. Most people and pundits I've watched and listened to and read over the course of the last few days, they seem to be hard fading the Broncos here. Is that what we should be doing? What are the chances that they could shock Buffalo and move on here? Denver's a plucky team, but I don't know if plucky is enough to get it done at Orchard Park this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, I have a very hard time seeing this happen. Like, that's one. And I mean, the market agrees. But like, as to your point, I think they're not very obvious and going to be a very high full faded team. So I like, one of my favorite plays, I think, for Denver is the defense. Because I do think that they are a legitimately good defense. The weather's probably not going to be very good in this game. They've racked up sacks. So maybe it's not at least super high scoring or, to the point. And they could at least put some pressure on and be and that's a way to get a little different just in picking who your fades are still and lead you to another path that's not exactly like everyone else.
We talked about players like George Pickens. Well, maybe not Pickens isn't a good example, but Rashad Bateman, Isaiah Likely, Khalil Shakir, these guys that could be all the difference in the world if you pick them. I look at Denver. I see just a gobbledygook in the backfield. I don't want to touch that. Cortland Sutton is going to be owned for people who want to take a stab. But I look at Marvin Mims, a really good compliment to Sutton. And Sutton makes him better. Mims makes Sutton better. Mims is a big-time, big-play guy. Look what he did against the Chiefs, and I know it was the Chiefs' backups or whatever, but it wasn't all their backups. And he blows up in Week 18. He's had some other blow-up plays this year. Is he the perfect big-play guy that you'll throw in as a flex and hope that he ends up being the correct Bronco to own instead of going with a kicker, going with a defense? What do you think about Marvin Mims in this challenge? Because he's going to be owned. I don't know how much, but he'd be a fun guy to watch.
I mean, first of all, I've been a Mims bull for a long time, unfortunately. So I was very keen on him last year. I keep going back to him this year. So I'm excited to hear you say that. He's still not getting the volume. I mean, he's still a rotational player is the problem. Like you say, he's been, again, very efficient, and he could get there on just a couple big plays. I think that would still be for me playing it if I was looking, through telling myself these stories that they lose, because could he do it one game? Sure. Do I have any confidence he could do it in 2-3 games? Definitely not. So I think if I had, again, a good amount of lineups, that he would be a fun guy to stick in there just because I do love him. But you're risking a 0. You could get a blow-up game, but you could very well get a goose egg. And it's really hard to take a 0 in this competition and make it. But I do think, to your point, Sutton is going to be a little higher owned than, like, to go back to like Pickens, because there is no one else to take that ownership away on his own team. They don't have a tight end. They don't have any running backs. They don't have, Mims is the closest to a second wide receiver that anyone would take. And I honestly don't know if anyone is going to take him and go there. I mean, it might be a less than 1% ownership type thing, or, 1% of teams. So that's why, if I was picking between, because I think that Pittsburgh also is going to be another highly faded team, I would probably do Pickens over Sutton personally, just because I think there's that ownership gap and there's similar type plays.
And I like the chances for Pittsburgh to pull the upset, and you get the 2 games out of Pickens, whereas I don't really see 2 games coming out of Cortland Sutton this postseason. Oh my, it's almost 8:00, and we have not tackled the NFC yet. That was very extensive on the AFC. Great stuff from you, Steph. Let's keep it going. We're going to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. It's going to be, and I mean this when I say this, it is a quick break. We're going to tackle the NFC next. We're going to lead off with the Lions, a cornucopia of fantasy goodness there. Plus, before we sign off tonight, Steph and I are each going to build a lineup ourselves. Steph Miller from Legendary Upside helping me out with our high-stakes fantasy football show preview of the FFPC World Famous Playoff Challenge on the Better Sports Network. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
You talk about utilizing something called perpetual reloading to ensure something called a permanent championship window with FFPC Dynasty Leagues. How do we make sure that perpetual reloading is what we're doing in our rookie drafts every year to make sure that we're always competing for titles year in and year out?
Yeah, so we always have this tension between playing a little bit for the future and playing for the present. You'll have drafters jump into the startup. They'll draft the veterans. They're trying to win in that first year. Sometimes they do. I don't want to in any way, shape, or form suggest that doesn't work, because you see some of those teams compete and win titles. And yet, when we're thinking about the best way to control your chances to win, you want to be in the playoffs year after year. You want your championship window to always be open. You don't want to get to a point where you build, and then have a couple of years where you're going for it and then you're rebuilding again. You want to be in it every year. You want to get as many buys as possible so you don't have to compete in that quarterfinal round. You build a more powerful team. You can't control the injury that you have to the key player that cost you a title, or the 50-point game that a non-elite player like Amari Cooper scores and knocks you out. You can control having one of the best teams every single season. The way that you do that is you build depth in your player talent across all those positions. You build depth in your picks. In order to execute some of those types of things, you trade down, you trade peak players, you trade young players. You've got to trade things that people want. A lot of times I think when people are trying to reload or rebuild, they're trying to trade distressed assets at a level that the rest of the group isn't interested in, and then you feel like you can't move. If you're going to make trades, you got to trade things that people
The FFPC Playoff Challenges are back for another season. Just pick 12 players, one from each playoff team, and ride them all the way to the big dance. It's that simple. Over $1.8 million is on the line between the 2 contests exclusive.
Eric Balkman and Steph Miller coming back at you here for the second segment of tonight's High Stakes Fantasy Football Show, featuring the world famous FFPC Playoff Challenge preview here on the Better Sports Network. At Steph Miller 57 is where to connect with Steph. And I know you get into you are the waiver queen, obviously, but I didn't realize you were in a dynasty auction league with Mr. Nick Costantino as well.
Yeah, one that I run.
Okay.
Yeah, he joined.
All right, got it.
And it's it was a lot of our leg up subscribers and people. But yeah, one of my favorite formats is auctions, and I wrote an auction strategy article as well. I mean, I think that it's just, outside of we get to do snake drafts for everything, on most of these platforms, and auctions just it's a unique thing. There's a lot of strategy involved, and it's a very fair way to draft, and it's really fun for Dynasty.
I never have. I mean, I've done auctions. I've done dynasties. I've never done a dynasty auction. So do you actually have an auction for the rookie draft as well?
Not in that league, but I do have 2 other leagues that I am running that we are doing auction for the rookie. So we trade. So we turn the picks into auction dollars.
Fantastic. So anybody who has the number 1 pick obviously has more dollars to spend than I got it.
Correct.
All right. You've hooked me. I got to get in one of these leagues. I got to set something up because that sounds awesome.
No, they're so much fun.
For sure. We did the AFC in case you missed it. We are getting into the NFC portion of our playoff challenge preview, helping you to hopefully a $500,000 grand prize in the FFPC Playoff Challenge. MyFFPC.com is where you want to go to register for this. That's myffpc.com, or scan the QR code that Matt has put up on the screen. Again, no draft, no salary cap. You are just formulating a 12-player lineup, 1 player per team. So you can't stack with a bunch of Lions or Chiefs or anything like that. 1 player per team. The highest score of whatever your lineup is for the entire postseason will win the $500K. Double points for anybody who makes it to the Super Bowl as well. MyFFPC.com. Enter for $200. Take a shot at a $500,000 grand prize. $35 entry fee will get you a $100,000 grand prize if you are able to outscore everybody else. MyFFPC.com is where to go, or scan the QR code. Now, the Detroit Lions will lead off the NFC portion. Similar to what I was talking about with Patrick Mahomes earlier, I think Jared Goff is being overlooked. Now, part of the reason is, number one, he's not like an elite, quote unquote, elite quarterback. You think about where he was ranked by a lot of the pundits out there on a week-to-week basis. Rarely was he in the top 5, even though he didn't do numbers this year. The other thing that's working against him, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, Jamison Williams, Monroe St. Brown, Sam Laporta, all these players. This is a talent-rich team when it comes to the skill position players. But I do think, again, having a quarterback in the Super Bowl where you're getting double points cannot be overlooked. Are we going to be overlooking Jared Goff here? I'm just looking this up from last year. He was owned in less than 1% of leagues as the quarterback. Maybe that's going to happen again this year, Steph. Do I have my Jared Goff colored glasses on right now? Am I talking him up too much for a challenge like this? I
mean, he's tough because, like you say, it's when you look at it in the scheme of things, there's a lot of opportunity cost on that team. Is he going to outscore, even though you get double points for whoever makes the Super Bowl, is he going to outscore Amon-Ra St. Brown? Is he going to outscore Jahmyr Gibbs? Is he, David Montgomery could have a big game. I mean, Jameson Williams can have there's a lot of other players that could, because again, we've seen him have those big games where he's passed for tons of yards, but in the Super Bowl, does he spread it out that much? Does it just get really concentrated onto his top receiver? And you'd rather have them in a 1-game outcome than Goff because he doesn't rush or add anything else. So to me, he's very hard to get to. I would probably, looking at Super Bowl quarterbacks in a vacuum, if I was comparing him to like Mahomes, the other pocket passer that's likely to make it, I would probably go with Mahomes, I think, over Goff, just because there's not the opportunity cost on his team. You just shut down the Jared Goff in me is now dead. I can't fathom putting together a lineup. Although if I was doing multiple, it'd be fun to put a Jared Goff lineup in there to see what that would look like. I can tell you the last year for the backfield, which I want to talk about next, David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs. Last year, Jahmyr Gibbs was owned by 16%
of the FFPC players in this competition. The ownership for David Montgomery, less than 2%. Montgomery, according to the not caddy, what's the word I want to look for with David Montgomery, or with Dan Campbell here, being very coy, or maybe not so coy, in saying he's excited when he was asked about whether David Montgomery is going to be back for the divisional round. What is this effect going to be on Jahmyr Gibbs? Jahmyr Gibbs was the guy down the stretch, right? When Montgomery was hurt, number one ranked running back seemingly every single week. They gave him all he could handle. I was listening to, I think it was Sean Siegel from RotoViz talk about this earlier this week. And he said, maybe it wasn't Sean, it might have been Ben Gretsch. It doesn't matter. Well, it does matter. And I apologize, I'm not giving proper credit to this. But one of them said, you could see monitoring carries and touches for Jahmyr Gibbs over the course of a season, right? Now it's all about winning these 3 games for Detroit. So why wouldn't you use Gibbs as much as possible? Have him out on the field with the ball in his hands as much as possible. I understand Montgomery is going to have an effect, but maybe not the effect that we think. And maybe it still is Gibbs' season, as the kids say. What about Gibbs here versus Montgomery? What do you think specifically the Montgomery return is going to have on Jahmyr Gibbs?
Now, I agree that it's Gibbs' season. But that being said, I think that you're foolish if you think there's not some effect. The team loves David Montgomery. He's going to get some touches. And the place they love to give him touches could be the goal line. So taking away some of that touchdown upside possibly, or at least cutting into it, is where I have some concerns that maybe his ceiling could be a little limited. Does that mean he still can't score from further out? No. We could see those explosive runs. I think they're going to use him in the pass game, but they're going to still work Montgomery in. He's not going away by any means. Would that stop me from playing Gibbs? No. But I do think that he's going – I do think that a lot of people are going to ignore it, and he's going to be very highly owned still.
Higher than the 60% he was on last year, do you think?
No, I think a little less than that. We got closer to 50.
Okay. Now let me ask you this. What if we talked about George Pickens in the previous segment, about being an explosive player. If you're going to go with a skill position guy for the Steelers, it should be Pickens, which I agree with. What if I told you in the other conference, there's a player perhaps just as or more dynamic than Pickens, and he plays not on a 6 seed, he plays on a 1 seed, and he plays on a much better offense that churns up yardage and points? What if I told you that was in the NFC? You'd be all over that. Well, it's Jameson Williams, and he's not the number 1 option. He may not even be the number 2 or 3 option on his team, but he does have that explosive playmaking ability. We know the Lions are probably going to make a deep run, and we know that their offense puts up points. How strong of a pivot, strong is not the right word, but how interesting, how lucrative of a pivot is Jameson Williams in this competition if you don't go with Gibbs or St. Brown or Laporta?
I mean, I like Jameson Williams. I think that he definitely could be somebody to get you there. Again, going that far down on the team, if I only have one team, it's hard. If I have a portfolio, I could definitely get there. But to me, Amon-Ra St. Brown is probably the best play on the slate, the entire slate right now. Now, this doesn't mean he's low owned, but he is quite a bit lower owned still than what I think Gibbs is going to end up. And if you look at the wide receiver ownership overall, he's not in as one of the highest. He's moderately owned. So I think there's going to be guys chalkier. So he's a great pivot. And I mean, a lot of times in these games, when everything's on the line, they're going to go to their number 1 guy, I feel like. I'm not saying that Jameson won't get some shots, especially downfield. And he's proven himself to be more than just a big play guy. But it would be hard for me looking at the numbers right now to really get away from probably Amon-Ra, just because I think he's just such a good play, just in his own right. Now, again, if I'm doing tons of lineups, I'm not going to do every single one. So I would probably mix some Jameson in. I do like Jameson, I think, better than Laporta even, personally. Maybe that's just still biased, even though he's starting to get there.
You know what's interesting is, and I say this, I've said this all week for like all the radio hits I've been doing, like 2 or 3 players. That's usually what it takes. 2 or 3 non-chalky players. Like you can eat the chalk on 75% of your roster here. Just be a little bit different on 2 or 3 players. And if you run pure and you hit on 9, 10, 11 players, and Jameson Williams is that last lion that you have, or is the only lion that you have in the Super Bowl, how much fun would that be? He was owned last year out of 7,800 teams in this competition. Jameson Williams owned in 14 out of 7,800 teams. If you're sitting 25th, 30th, 50th, 100th even, and nobody in front of you is Jameson Williams, and they're playing in the Super Bowl, man, that is going to be a fun watch to see how high he can take you. Now, let's talk about the other 2 big-time pass catchers, Laporta, St. Brown. Laporta was owned in fewer than 2% of leagues last year. The most owned wide receiver in the competition last year was not Amon-Ra St. Brown. It was CeeDee Lamb at 87%. But St. Brown was second at 78%. I'm guessing, despite Gibbs going ham the last month, we're still going to see St. Brown up there, that 75%, 80% ownership. Is that the right move? Is this something you can get behind, knowing there are so many more pivots on Detroit, maybe more so than any other team in the postseason? You still good with the Amon-Ra St. Brown play here? And I'm not saying you are good. I'm asking you, would you be good with this stuff?
I mean, I don't think he's going to get that high, first of all. And then even last year, we only saw 3 players get that high. And, we didn't have quite the same emergence of other guys last year. So even on his own team, there's a lot of competition that's going to split that up, So I think maybe like he's going to be closer to the 40% range. Which is why I'm saying, like, people really want Gibbs right now. I mean, I think Gibbs is just, and then there's a few people that are going to try Laporta. And there's going to be a few people that will go to Jameson Williams.
And a couple of people like me that'll use Jared Goff.
And a couple that might go to Goff. So, I mean, then maybe you get somebody that's, I don't think we're going to get anyone that's going to fade them, but you never know. I mean, we saw people last year fade, or at least do like Justin Tucker, or something on Baltimore. I mean, who knows? But you just get there. Like I said, a lot of this it's very different when you're playing 1 or 2 teams and when you're playing several teams.
And nail on the head there for sure. And if you are playing multiple teams, the Lions are going to be a fun team to figure out because there's so many different ways that you can go on that. For sure. Let's talk about some of the games coming up this weekend. We'll start off in Philadelphia, the Eagles hosting the Packers. Jalen Hurts, by the time he takes the field at the Link on Sunday afternoon, it will be 3 weeks since he played meaningful NFL football with the real bullets flying around him. How nervous should we be about some potential rustiness for Jalen Hurts, at least for the first week?
I mean, I guess maybe so, but maybe I'm just a little naive since it was a concussion and not any other physical ailment that I'm not overly concerned. They did pretty well against the Packers when they played them in the season. I do think that they win this game pretty easily, personally, even though as a Cowboys fan, I have a little bit of concerns whenever I see the Packers facing someone in the first round and feel overconfident. Pan back to last year, but I'm still pretty comfortable. And I mean, Hurts practiced in full today, so he's on par where I think we should hear that he passes as long as, the concussion protocol tomorrow, I guess they have to say that he has no symptoms after practicing in full is the next step. And I think that could be another interesting pivot, even at quarterback, possibly, or his pass catchers are going to be really low owned. I mean, pretty much everyone that's not Saquon is going to be really low owned there. and they're all really good.
What
pivots.
about I want to talk about Barkley in a second, but what about AJ Brown? You know, he's going to be one of the targets that Hurts is going to have. Talk about rustiness with Hurts. Brown, I don't believe practiced yesterday. I know he did not practice today. He's dealing with a knee injury, and he's been dealing with this knee injury for about a month or so. Now, I wouldn't say he's balled out, but he's been very good when he's been out there. Is this more of a rest thing? Like, I think that I'd be less concerned about A.J. Brown if they didn't have a great option opposite him, but they do in Devonta Smith. So if you are looking at pivoting away from Barkley and you're not going to utilize Hurts, should Brown be the guy, or does this injury kind of scare you off that a little bit?
I think I would still go Brown, but I could definitely see. I mean, Smith ended the year pretty strong. Now, most of that was without Goddard, who's going to be back. I don't think that Hurts has ever lost a game that A.J. Brown has played. A.J. Brown tore up the Packers their first time around, several touchdowns. Yeah. I think, and he's one of those players that always just seems to play through things. Like, he's always banged up as well. So I kind of think it's rest, and they're just taking care of him and being a little more cautious. I would probably go there, but I do think both of them are good pivots and strong pivots in their own right.
I think,
but I think he's low enough owned that you don't need to necessarily go to Smith. But if I was doing multiple teams, I'd definitely mix both.
I think the other thing, and maybe this is a quick conversation, Dallas Goedert not on your radar for this?
Not really, with everybody healthy. And I mean, again, that would be more of a move if I was making an upset for them. Like, it's another soft fade where I didn't want to go defense kicker. I didn't want to full fade him. But maybe I did think there was, like, if I paired him, I would probably do something crazy. Well, maybe not crazy. Maybe it would just be Josh Jacobs. But I was going to say you could do something with, like, a Packer, which nobody's going to play any of the Packers wide receivers.
No, they shouldn't. I mean, people will, but I wouldn't.
I don't recommend it.
I don't either.
But...
I'm with you. You and I are definitely on the same page on that one for sure. Regarding Barkley, the most owned running back last year in the competition, the FFPC Playoff Challenge, which is what we're talking about tonight, was Christian McCaffrey at 79%. You think Barkley's going to be up there at 79%? And if he is, should we be going with Brown, Smith, or maybe even Hurts, knowing that there are some other really talented options on the Eagles? This is the anti-Josh Allen, right? Where you pivot off Allen, not much there. But if you pivot off Barkley, there's some playmakers there.
I do think we have Barkley as the most highest owned player on the entire slate. And it's going to be close to that. It's high. We got him in the higher 70s. So I do think he's going to be really chalky. I do think he's a good play. I also think that A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith are two of the best pivots in this contest you can make, or Hurts. If you really want to, do that, you got to kind of think through the quarterback options quite a bit, but I would definitely mix him in as well if I was doing multiple teams. I don't think that you can't still roster Saquon. I would just be careful about who else you're pairing him with. So if you're doing him, I wouldn't do the next chalkiest guy. You're going to have to make some pivots. You're going to have to get uncomfortable somewhere, but it's definitely can still be done.
I think the other team that we'll talk about this other team. I don't think we need to spend a ton of time on them. The Packers. I don't, this time last year, they were playing really, really good. Jordan Love was at the peak of his powers. And then they took out Dallas, the 2 seed last year. Packers, the only 7 seed ever to win a game in the NFL postseason. I don't think they do it this year for a variety of reasons. I think Philly's a lot better than what Dallas was at this time last year. Green Bay's not playing their best ball, and they're banged up too with Christian Watson. To start our conversation about the Packers, what receiver steps up in Watson's absence is kind of irrelevant, because even if you hit it right, Steph, and it's Jaden Reed against the Eagles, or it's Dontavian Wicks against the Eagles, and even if the Packers win, there's no guarantee that receiver is going to be the guy that you want against the Lions the following week, right? So even if you nail it the first week, it's still roulette. Every single week the Packers are still in. Even if Green Bay makes a playoff run, I don't see any I see nothing but hair pulling and gnashing of teeth if you're picking a Packers receiver here. And I think that's the point we want to drive home.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a good point and that's kind of the point I was making earlier, even about like the Chiefs. Some of these teams, it's hard to pick a guy that's going to make a consistent run for multiple games. And that's what, if you're wasting, I don't want to say wasting, but you're using your skilled position players at wide receiver and running back. These are, coveted spots. You want these guys to move on as much as possible. It's, you want somebody that is going to score you points multiple times. You could get one big blow up game and then nothing. And I mean, I'm with you. I just really don't see that they're going to win. So I don't have any interest there. I think Josh Jacobs is going to be decently owned. Depends. I would mix him into some lineups. That's just kind of where I stand. Maybe you could, if you wanted to punt tight end, maybe Tucker Kraft would be something you could do, because in that case, I would be okay with, doing that in a loss. It's still probably not my favorite play.
No,
but
nor mine. I could see it. I'm with you. I could see it. It's not my favorite. My concern with Jacobs, and this is the other portion of the Packers offense here, Green Bay has transitioned to a power running team this year, something that we haven't seen in a long time. So when you talk about not knowing which receiver is going to be the one to own every week, even if Green Bay goes on this miracle run, it's not worth picking. It's not worth trying to pick one when you got to hold them the whole postseason. But if you pivot and you go with Josh Jacobs, who probably is going to be the most owned Packer, at least among the skill position players, you can't really run on Philly. And the Packers without Christian Watson this year has struggled against man defense. And I can see it now that Vic Fangio is going to throw a lot of man with Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell, and Wicks is not going to be able to win consistently. Reed is not going to be able to win consistently. And if I'm Fangio and I know that none of these receivers scare me, man, I can load up the box and I may not even have to with Jacobs if they know a run's coming. So that's my concern with Jacobs. Really good regular season, kind of an accumulator this year, which I don't necessarily like backs like that. And that's why I think that I would either be in full fade, maybe soft fade mode and with McManus. I don't think I'd do the defense. McManus would be the other guy I consider, or to your point with Kraft. But that's my concern with Jacobs, is I could easily see this guy having 45 rushing yards, 2 catches, doesn't get in the end zone, and then you're ticked off at, why did I play Jacobs when I could have, played McManus or just faded the Packers entirely?
I totally agree. I mean, I think those are very relevant concerns. And I think that, Philly's a great defense. I mean, they could easily shut him down. And like you say, they have those great corners that could just play man and stack the box. I mean, I could see it happening. It's definitely more than viable. I don't say probable.
Likely.
Possibly probable. Yeah.
Let's move on and talk about Tampa. The darling, and I believe he made the thumbnail for this show tonight on YouTube for Tampa, not only this season, definitely down the stretch, and maybe in the postseason. Bucky Irving, this guy had, I believe, 18 touches, or was it 18 touches? I think it was 18 touches in the Tampa's must-win game in Week 18. Rachaad White, 0 touches. Sean Tucker, 2 touches. There you go. Matt Deutsch throwing it up right now. There's our boy Bucky Irving on the screen in all his glory. When you have Irving and I think we've talked about kind of like a committee type thing with the Tampa backfield the majority of the year. It's not a committee anymore. It is Bucky Irving's backfield. The Buccaneers are putting up crazy amounts of points. When we talk about dark horse teams that maybe could make a run, Tampa's one of them. Do you think Bucky Irving, knowing the presence of Mike Evans on this team, is going to be over or under owned? What are the legendary upside projected percentages show on Bucky Irving? And then also, Steph, how do you feel about Bucky Irving in this playoff challenge if you choose him as your Buccaneer as either a running back or a flex?
Well, first of all, I am with you, and I love myself some Bucky Irving. Like he's a fabulous player. I think that we got him a little higher than Mike
Okay.
Evans, which feels right because I feel like a lot of people are pretty excited about him. I don't think that Rachaad White is going away necessarily. I do think people are a little overconfident there. Now, I'm not saying he's playable in this. I don't think he is. But, it's still projected to be a close game. It's projected to be a very high-scoring game. So if they got behind, we could see White get out there a little more than we'd like. You could tell yourself a story with Mike Evans and Marshawn Lattimore. Narrative, I think he's healthy and he's going to play this one. So maybe he shuts him down some, but we've seen also Jalen McMillan start to emerge a little bit. I think that even with there's a little gap in ownership, I still really Bucky's a place I'm willing to eat the chalk. I really like him.
Buccaneers a 3-point favorite. This is the highest total game of Wild Card Weekend, 50.5 points, according to our friends in the desert here. In regards to Evans versus Irving, last year, Tampa, highest owned player was Evans at 43%. Second was Rachaad White at 20%. Now, bear in mind, Rachaad White does not have the dynamic playmaking ability that Irving does. And Evans, obviously another year older, and Washington has been pretty good against perimeter receivers this year too. So that's working against Evans as well. So yeah, for sure, Irving is a guy that I think a lot of people, he's the player you didn't know you needed until you actually rostered him, and we're thrilled with the results. The other thing I wanted to bring up before we move off of Tampa here, and I have to look up the injury report just to make sure I'm not talking out of my rear end here. Cade Otton, full practice today. Okay, so he's in play as well. Cade Otton was really, really good this season. The concern here, he was not good for the entire season, and he was really, really good in the games that Mike Evans missed. Mike Evans is healthy right now. Do we have any interest in Otton in the tight end premium format like this?
I don't, personally. I don't think he's very good. It was always about volume, and I don't think it's going to be there with the healthier guys returning. Now, I will say, with this being the highest total game, I think a very popular to play both sides of this game and people not pick a winner because, you get two games basically that you don't have to do that because you have those 4 fades. You have the two total fades and then your kicker defense. So I think a good way to get different would be to maybe do a soft fade on one side of this game or play it in a little more unique way. Probably Washington would be the more popular way to do it, and probably would be my preference as well. But I will say, I think Bucky or Mike Evans and Terry McLaurin is going to be very popular. Even despite individual ownership, just that combination.
Which would make perfect sense. And let's talk about Washington. I'm gonna throw this right at you as long as you bring up McLaurin. Terry McLaurin or Zach Ertz as your commander de jour here. Would you rather get the receiver or the tight end, bearing in mind the tight end premium scoring, knowing how involved Zach Ertz has been the last couple of weeks? And as a McLaurin owner, love the season overall, Steph. Fantastic season. But I do remember a few of those clunkers that he's had this season. And man, it would really, really sting if you play McLaurin and he has one of those clunkers this game. Maybe it won't happen because the total's 50. But it is still in the back of my mind. McLaurin or Ertz, who do you like better? McLaurin?
I'm going to say McLaurin I like better in a vacuum just because, the passing matchup is amazing against Tampa. But that said, I do like Ertz as a pivot, again, at tight end if you're getting off of the ultra premium guys, just because I think most people are going to play Terry opposite one of those other guys. So that in itself is going to be pretty different. And I don't think Zach Ertz is going to be low owned, but I think he'll be a lot lower in that combination. Could be. So it's another way that you could get different. And if you're using it as a pivot off of Kelsey, that's going to cut a lot of ownership as well, because I think he's going to be, again, so high at the tight end. Or you could use it in a flex if you really wanted to be brave. I don't think that this year many people are going to do a tight end in the flex because it's weaker overall.
It would have been totally different had the Cardinals made the playoffs, and then you could have seen some Kelsey McBride, some Laporta McBride, or stuff like that. But I'm with you on that. Zach Ertz over his last 2 games, 11 catches for 116 yards and 3 touchdowns. That was against Atlanta and Dallas. This is actually a rematch, this Tampa game. It's a rematch of Washington when they visited Tampa in week 1. In that game, Zach Ertz, 3 catches for 28 yards. McLaurin, excuse me, as long as I talk about the Commanders, McLaurin in that game, week 1, catching passes from Jaden Daniels. That game, McLaurin ended up going 2 catches for 17 yards on 4 targets. It was a clunker. Will it be again? I don't know, but I'm with you, Steph. I think if you're talking about McLaurin or B. Ertz, McLaurin is my vote. The running backs, Eckler's back. These guys cannibalizing each other where they're a non-factor. You're not considering either Robinson or Eckler?
It's hard to right now. It's really hard to get there. I mean, yeah, we just haven't seen the same volume for B-Rob since Eckler's been back. I mean, down the stretch, and it's just such a huge opportunity cost with how strong the running backs we have are. And then you have, because you only have to have really the 2 running backs, and then you get all the flex positions. So now you're going against all the wide receivers too. And it's not my favorite pivot here. I mean, again, it's hard to pick the guy for if they do make a multiple game run, because maybe, they're playing with the lead. Maybe you see B-Rob more, but they get behind and it's a game and it's Eckler the next one or something.
I want to move on to the Rams here. And this is the breaking news we had in the first segment. If you did not see this, the Rams and Vikings no longer playing in Los Angeles due to the fires that are going on there. They're going to be playing at State Farm Stadium in Glendale, the home of the Arizona Cardinals. Same time, same day on Monday night. They're still playing at the same time and date. However, that game will be in Arizona. I don't know if it necessarily affects the Rams all that much because, quite frankly, they don't really draw fans. It's always boggles my mind whenever I watch a Rams game. It's the opposing team that has the more fans there. So I don't think it necessarily hurts them at all. But let's analyze the Rams, specifically the conversation of Kyren Williams versus Puka Nacua. And I think largely that is what people have focused on as they try to figure out which Ram to pick. Kyren Williams probably going to be touching the ball more than Nacua. He's had another fantastic season. He's getting into the end zone. He's getting goal line. And, oh, by the way, Blake Corum, he broke his arm. So he is a non-factor going forward. It's Ronnie Rivers that's backing him up. And I think the Rams would have been much more likely to utilize Corum more so than Rivers. So this could be the Kyren Williams show, knowing that this is do or die from here on out. Puka Nacua playing the wide receiver position as well as anybody in the NFL down the stretch. What he's been able to do, it seems like Stafford and him are in a rhythm. There's a synergy there. There's some sort of connection that has allowed Nacua to become statistically and in real life one of the best receivers in the league. When it comes down to these two, I lean Nacua not just because, but one of the reasons is I see a lot of these winning teams being dominated by receivers over the last few years to win the 500K in the playoff challenge with the FFPC. That's probably the tiebreaker for me. I could easily see Kyren Williams. Do you see this as kind of like an even split between Williams and Nacua, or do you think Nacua is going to be a lot more owned?
Nacua is going to be far and away more owned. People have been kind of down on Kyren, honestly, down the stretch. He's lost a little bit of his luster. And I agree that he could see more touches, but I mean, just what Puka does out there, it's hard to get away from. He's a guy that I'm still probably willing to eat the chalk on. Again, if I was doing more than one lineup or 2 or 3, I would mix Kyren in because I think Puka's going to be one of the highest owned players in the entire format, just because you look at it, most people don't want to fade this game, and they're going to feel he just feels comfortable. And especially if you're playing them to win, you know where the ball's going and you feel like you're getting there. Now, you still know where it's going with Kyren, not saying you don't. It's just hard to get away from Puka here. It really is.
Puka Nacua, Steph, missed 6 games this year. You can probably say 6.5 because he got hurt against the Lions. He still caught 79 balls for 990 yards. Only 3 touchdowns, but he almost had a 1,000-yard season in basically 11 games. That's insane. Mm-hmm. And if you look at how involved he's been, He had this weird Seattle game in week 9, 1 catch for 11 yards. And I'm going to throw out the first game where he got hurt because he didn't play the full game. These other games for receptions, 7, 9, 7, 9, 5, 12, 7, 8, 10. I mean, it's incredible. And to your point, when we're looking for explosive players, chalk be damned. Nacua is probably going to be the Ram. He might, quite frankly, be the most owned wide receiver in this challenge, and it wouldn't surprise me at all. Kyron Williams is an interesting pivot, but man, you really got to have some gumption to go with Williams over Nacua in this, or a lot of teams in this format. The only other Ram I want to bring up here before we move on to Minnesota, Cooper Kupp. So this guy was a world beater for years when he's been healthy, and he's healthy right now. And yet you look at his numbers down the stretch, it is, we always heard that it's 1A versus 1B with Nacua and Kupp. It's not anymore. Kupp, 1 catch for 29 yards in week 17, 3 for 24 in week 16, and a bagel on 3 targets in week 15. Dude's had 4 catches in 3 weeks. You can't trust him, right? I mean, is there any kind of inkling in you that says, like, you know what? It's the playoffs. Stafford won a Super Bowl with Kupp. Let's saddle up and go with Kupp as a pivot here. Any part of you saying that?
No, none of it. I mean, the problem, maybe if Puka wasn't who he is, if he wasn't so good and so dominant, sure. If there was like a bunch of guys that were getting, some work, and not in this format, not with, most of these contests that, there's still, like I said, you can't really afford a 0, and there's no guarantee that you're going to get a second chance with any of these teams. So for me, again, I think Kyron is a good enough pivot if you wanted to make a pivot there. Like he's going to be pretty low, especially in comparison, because Puka's going to be one of the highest owned receivers. So just, between 2 guys on the team, that's already going to get you super unique. I don't think you need to do the Kupp thing. I wouldn't risk it.
We are coming into the last half hour of the show, so it's time to get wacky. Let me throw a scenario at you, Steph Miller here from Legendary Upside. The Minnesota Vikings right now have the 3rd best odds to win the Super Bowl out of any NFC team, behind only the Eagles and the Lions. If the Vikings were to win this week in Arizona against the Rams, they would probably, not for sure, probably move on to face Detroit. That's at the forefront of a lot of people's minds. Even if the Vikings were to win 1 game, they would face Detroit, a team that dominated them for the division title in week 18. Okay, Sam Darnold, worst game of the season, right? All those good feelings, everything he built up is out the window after what the Lions did to him. And yet, I think about all those times Justin Jefferson got open against that Lions defense and Darnold simply missed him. Missed him on plays that he hit him on all season long. And for whatever reason, maybe it was an off night. Maybe it was a bad night. Maybe he was seeing ghosts again. I don't know. But I look at this, Minnesota 3rd best odds to get to the Super Bowl from the NFC, and knowing that people saw him get demolished on national TV against the Lions. If you believe in the Vikings, should you believe in Sam Darnold as your quarterback in the FFPC Playoff Challenge? A guy who was this close as far as games go to being the number 1 seed, or being the quarterback of the number 1 seed in the NFC. I think that nobody's talking about this. Nobody's looking at it because of recency bias, because of what we saw on Sunday night in Detroit, where Darnold looked like the old Sam Darnold and not the MVP level Sam Darnold we saw for the majority of the season. Maybe I'm trying to create something out of nothing here, but to me, I think you're putting together multiple lineups. Take a look at Sam Darnold here. What do you think?
I mean, I do think that it's possible for Minnesota to make a run. Just because they had 1 bad game doesn't mean they can't get back there. I would still have trouble, I think, getting to Darnold, just because, again, it's hard for me to see him outscoring Jefferson straight up, or his other receivers or players, just because, again, these pocket passers, that's what makes it so hard without having that big rushing upside. So it's like in that scenario, I feel like I almost still want Justin Jefferson.
Okay. Which is fair. Now, regarding the Vikings receivers, Jefferson and Addison. This past, I don't want to use this past game as an example because both of them were really not great. We have seen games this year where Addison was the guy over Jefferson. Not the guy, but he outperformed Jefferson from a statistical standpoint. If the Vikings are one and done, and the point spread on this game, once again in Arizona now, not in Los Angeles, the Vikings are only a 2.5 point favorite. If they're one and done, that increases the variance in a single game format where maybe Addison is the guy to own over Jefferson. Maybe it's Hawkinson over Jefferson. If you are projecting a Rams win, would you still want Jefferson on your team, or would you want to take a shot on Addison or Hawkinson instead? Or I'll throw this at you. Aaron Jones, too, who has been banged up, and we know he's been dealing with something. Let's throw that pepper into this Vikings gumbo as well. Justin Jefferson probably going to be the highest owned Vikings player, but if you're pivoting off that, especially if you're projecting a Rams win, who should we look at here?
It'd be hard projecting the win, I guess, because I do like going like the Addison, and I want to like the Hawkinson route. But to me, again, seeing that happen over more than one game is really hard. So it's like I feel like if I do pick them, I am probably projecting them to lose. But I guess you could do Addison. Now, Hawkinson's got a really good matchup this week. The Rams, I think it's the second, give up the second most tight end points of the teams. Okay. So, but we just have, and now he's increased his routes again, but we just haven't seen the volume there, and we just haven't seen that connection there. So I don't know if he's fully healthy. So that's what holds me back, but I would love it to be a play. Yeah, I think if I'm projecting the win, for me, it would be Jefferson or bust, but I do like pivoting that the other way and still taking Addison. Because I think, again, when we talk about pairings, Puka and Jefferson are going to be two of the highest owned receivers and two of the highest owned receivers together, because most people are thinking that way.
I think that I'm glad that this is the last game of Wild Card Weekend, because this is going to be one of the more fun ones to watch between the Rams and Nakua and Jefferson going back and forth. Tom Smith in the chat. Balky, if you could play in this contest, would you take Darnold as your quarterback? One team, single bullet? No. Multiple teams? Yeah. I'm going to have a Darnold team for sure. No question. That is the NFC. So we have covered the AFC. We have covered the NFC. It is time to put the proverbial money where our mouth is, because we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'm going to build a playoff challenge lineup. Steph is going to build a playoff challenge lineup, and maybe one of these lineups will end up being the $500,000 winning lineup. You'll have to let us know, because I'm not entering it. Steph, it's totally up to you if you want to enter yours. But that is what we're doing in the final segment of the show. She's Steph Miller from Legendary Upside. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. This is the FFPC High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. Don't go anywhere. We roll on next.
You talk about utilizing something called perpetual reloading to ensure something called a permanent championship window with FFPC Dynasty Leagues. How do we make sure that perpetual reloading is what we're doing in our rookie drafts every year to make sure that we're always competing for titles year in and year out?
Yeah, so we always have this tension between playing a little bit for the future and playing for the present. You'll have drafters jump into the startup. They'll draft the veterans. They're trying to win in that first year. Sometimes they do. I don't want to in any way, shape, or form suggest that that doesn't work, because you see some of those teams compete and win titles. And yet, when we're thinking about the best way to control your chances to win, you want to be in the playoffs year after year. You want your championship window to always be open. You don't want to get to a point where you build, and then have a couple of years where you're going for it and then you're rebuilding again. You want to be in it every year. You want to get as many buys as possible so you don't have to compete in that quarterfinal round. You build a more powerful team. You can't control the injury that you have to the key player that cost you a title, or the 50-point game that a non-elite player like an Amari Cooper scores and knocks you out. You can control having one of the best teams every single season. The way that you do that is you build depth in your player talent across all those positions. You build depth in your picks. In order to execute some of those types of things, you trade down, you trade peak players, you trade young players. You've got to trade things that people want. A lot of times I think when people are trying to reload or rebuild, they're trying to trade distressed assets at a level that the rest of the group isn't interested in, and then you feel like you can't move. If you're going to make trades, you got to trade things that people.
The FFPC Playoff Challenges are back for another season. Just pick 12 players, one from each playoff team, and ride them all the way to the big dance. It's that simple. Over $1.8 million is on the line between the two contests exclusive.
You know, I just noticed this as we welcome you back into the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network here. Eric Balkman, Steph Miller from Legendary Upside. The Vikings were actually a 1-point favorite. Now they are a 2.5-point favorite now that the game is at a neutral site in Arizona for the playoffs. Interesting stuff that the line would move that much and that quickly. But that is we don't often get breaking news on the show. We got it tonight. Minnesota and Los Angeles moved to Arizona on Monday night because of the fires in California. We're talking world famous FFPC Playoff Challenge lineups tonight. We have given you a lot of insight into not only teams, but players as well. And now is the time to actually formulate a lineup. You can formulate lineups yourself at myffpc.com. myffpc.com is where to go to register for these playoff challenges. No draft, no salary cap. You can put these teams together in literally minutes and adjust them all the way up to 4:30 Eastern when the games kick off, or the Chargers and Texans kick off on Saturday afternoon. No players, you can't duplicate, you can't have players from the same team in your lineup. So no Mahomes and Kelsey, no Hurts and A.J. Brown, no Nakua and Kyron Williams. You can't have that. You got to pick one player per team. It's a standard FFPC lineup. Quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 receivers, tight end, kicker, defense, and then 4 flexes in this as well. You want to play? Register now. myffpc.com. I sent out an email to the FFPC mailing list a few hours ago. We're pacing ahead of last year's signups, which was a sellout. So make sure you get your teams early. If you don't want to build them right now, that's fine. But get the teams just so you're not left out in the cold. And as my HSFF Hour co-host Farrell Elliott would say, don't be a wish I had. Get in now. Get those teams registered. $35 will get you in the running for a $100,000 grand prize. A $200 entry fee gets you in the running for a $500,000 grand prize. Fantasy football is not over. Take advantage while you can and while it's still here. So, Steph, I built a lineup here for the playoff challenge. I'm going to take you through it here. We can go piece by piece. Some of these players we'll talk about more than others. But I feel like I'm looking at this. I feel like it is a little too chalky. Maybe not. I mean, there were some pivots in here. I'll get your thoughts. We'll start it off at quarterback. Probably going to be the second highest owned quarterback in the competition. I'm betting on a Ravens appearance in the Super Bowl with this pick. I'm going with Lamar Jackson. No Derrick Henry. I'm of the belief that this is, I just gut feeling. I believe that this is the Ravens' year. I think they get to the big game and they get there, obviously with some help with Derrick Henry. But I think Lamar Jackson puts it together this year. We heard him talking in his post-game press conference. He was happy with what happened in Week 18. He's focused on bigger things. And I think this is the year. I think it's a huge postseason for him. I have my quarterback. I mean, I don't expect an argument here for you. That's just, he's going to be one of the most owned quarterbacks. So what your thoughts on that?
I think he's definitely going to be one of the most owned, but for good reason. I like Lamar. He's in my top 2.
My trio of running backs that I have on this squad are James Cook, James Cook, Saquon Barkley, and Bucky Irving. We talked about Irving before. I felt like initially that this might be a pivot off Mike Evans. The more I've been thinking about it the last day or so, the more I think that this is just going to be the primary play for so many Buccaneers in this contest. It's going to be Irving. The Cook is my pivot. Obviously, if I have Lamar Jackson, I can't play Josh Allen. And I know there's going to be a lot of Lamar Jackson, James Cook teams out there. But I still feel like it's the right choice for Buffalo. If you don't go with Allen, I can't really tell myself the story where Shakir is going to be better, Kincaid. And then Barkley is the guy for Philly. I don't necessarily think that There, we talked about the rustiness for Jalen Hurts, and you're right. I'm glad it's not like a shoulder, an elbow, a leg, or anything like that. I just worry about the timing, especially knowing that A.J. Brown is a little dinged up right now too. And I know what Barkley did this past season, so the Eagles clearly know how their bread is buttered, and it is buttered with I can't believe it's not Barkley. So Barkley, Cook, and Irving are my 3 running backs here. A strong trio, maybe kind of a chalky trio. What's your take on my running backs on this squad?
I mean, yeah, they're going to be a little bit chalky, but I mean, I think that for good reason, and I think they're a good trio there. I mean, I don't have any arguments against any of them. I definitely could see them being the 3 best running backs on the slate.
The 3, again, I'm going with 3 receivers here. It is Nico Collins, it is Justin Jefferson, and it is Puka Nacua. Now, we just talked ad nauseum about both Jefferson and Nacua. I know you like both of them. We know they're going to be highly owned as well. I thought about pivoting to Hawkinson. I thought about pivoting to Addison. When it came down to it, the image of Jefferson breaking free for several touchdowns that Darnold missed him on, I'm like, God, this guy is just so good. I can't fade him. I'm going with Jefferson. Nacua, I don't even need to explain. And then St. Brown, to me, is a quasi pivot because of the projected ownership of Gibbs that we'll have in this contest. It's going to be a lot higher than it was last year. So St. Brown is a bit of a pivot. He could still be the highest owned Lion. So I'm going, again, a little bit chalky. I definitely could have gone with Laporta here, but I'm rolling with St. Brown. I'm rolling with Nacua, and I'm rolling with Jefferson. Your thoughts on my choices for Vikings, Rams, and Lions here in this lineup?
I mean, I like all those plays quite a bit. I do think that, like you say, it's getting there. So I think you're going to need to do something
different
in the next couple of picks. Unique. Maybe go back and make one little tweak if it ends up you think too chalky in the end. But I'd rather start off that way
and then adjust.
Then adjust it down than getting too out there and trying to reel it back
exactly. Tight ends. I'm going with 2 of them. Last year's winning team did have 2 tight ends on it. I'm going to go with Travis Kelce, and this is my first kind of pivot here. I'm going with Zach Ertz. I know he did not have the greatest week in week 1 against Tampa, but neither did Terry McLaurin, and I don't want to really touch those running backs there. I'm definitely not rolling with Jaden Daniels. I just don't see a way that the Commanders get to the Super Bowl. I've been wrong before, so you never know. But I'm going to go with Zach Ertz, tight end premium format. And Kelce, with Ertz on this team, I could definitely go with an Xavier Worthy or an Isaiah Pacheco if I wanted to. As it stands, I ended up deciding on Travis Kelce and Zach Ertz as my tight ends. Are you surprised at all about the double tight end format as we're going 21 personnel essentially here?
Yeah, a little bit, but I mean, not because it's FFPC, which is tight end premium, famously, but I think that will be unique. So there's your piece that just in general, I think 2 parts of it. I think that most people will play Terry over Ertz because they want to play this game to shoot out. And I think that most people that do play Ertz, it would be just in their tight end spot and not as a flex. I don't think very many people are going to do the double tight end this year. Because it's just really hard to get to. So that's very unique in itself. So I think, especially if you're doing the bigger contest, if you were entering this one in the $200 one, I think you might be able to get away with it. Maybe the $35 one, I would make maybe a little tweak.
And I'm just tweaks are coming to mind right now of things I could pivot off of. Kicker and defense here for me. I'm going with Brandon McManus from the Packers. Matt LaFleur has gotten, for whatever reason, he's gotten a little bit more conservative this year, probably the most conservative he's been since year 1. 6 years ago as the Packers head coach. So I could see him taking points at times when he didn't take points against Philly, which, they ended up losing that game week 1. Another week 1 rematch. Crazy. Except for this one's not in Brazil. It's in Philadelphia. So I'm going to go with McManus here and bet on 2 or 3 field goals, maybe a couple extra points in what could be a high-scoring game. The total on that is 45.5 for that Packers Eagles game. And then my defense, I'm going with the Chargers over the Texans. Chargers been one of the best defenses all year. I don't have a whole lot of faith in that Texans offense. I'm betting on a big play Collins touchdown, and hopefully he gets that. But other than that, the Chargers shut him down, and I'm full fading the Denver Broncos and the Pittsburgh Steelers. So once again, my lineup is going to be Lamar Jackson at quarterback, Saquon Barkley, James Cook, Bucky Irving at running back, Nico Collins, Justin Jefferson, Puka Nacua, Amon-Ra St. Brown are my receivers. And then tight end, Travis Kelce, tight end, Zach Ertz, Brandon McManus at kicker, Chargers at defense. Looking at it right now, and this is what happens when we formulate these lineups, Steph. Looking at it right now, I'm like, you know what? I do need to tweak 2 things on this. Maybe just 1, but definitely I think 2 in my mind. I'd feel more comfortable about that. I just need to make an adjustment. But that's what happens on these. You want to adjust, and then you say, no, I like this lineup too much. I'm just going to get another team, and so on and so forth. So if we were to get another team on the show tonight, and if I was to have Steph Miller in charge of this team, how would we be starting off your lineup tonight? Who is your quarterback, Steph?
All right. So I went very chalky for my quarterback here, and I went with Josh Allen. Like I said earlier, I feel like he's just going to separate on his own team, and he has a very good chance to make. It's pretty much, in my mind, going to, whoever ends up winning between Buffalo and Baltimore could be, who knows, the upsetting the Chiefs there and making a run for it. Because a lot of it also Cook, who I said would be the big pivot. Is it that much lower owned in a nutshell than Allen is, even though Allen is the highest owned quarterback? So you're not saving a ton of ownership there. Then I decided to stay chalky and go with Saquon because I have no faith in Green Bay, as we kind of talked about. So I feel like, maybe Hurts does take a little bit to rev up, and they could just run all over them and play ball possession. And it's just the Saquon Barkley show all day, every day, especially during that first week. Now, those are probably, two of the, I told you Saquon's probably the highest owned guy of his position as well as the whole slate.
So we got Allen, Allen and Barkley. Who do we have as Steph Miller's second running back here tonight?
Well, unfortunately, we're staying chalky, but I promise I do make pivots at some point. We do make a few pivots at some point. So I went with Bucky Irving because, he's the poster boy, and I told you how much I liked him as well. Okay. Then a slight pivot. This one's not too crazy. I went with Amon-Ra. I said earlier, I think, when we look at it, he's far and away would be my favorite play on the slate, just given what I think that Gibbs' ownership is, and maybe a slight knock on his ceiling with Montgomery coming back. And then we've seen Amon-Ra do it so many times and just be the guy. For my next wide receiver, I decided to do Worthy.
Okay, we're going with Xavier Worthy here as your second wide receiver. So there you go. We get a pivot right there with Xavier Worthy as your second wide receiver. Talk about the mindset behind that. I guess we kind of did already. That explosive play ability, and you like him better than the other 2 options at wide receiver for Kansas City.
Yeah, and a lot of it was that I think that the 2 highest owned players are going to be Saquon and Travis Kelce, so I didn't want to put them together. Good point. I think doing one is fine, but I don't want both of them in the same lineup. So I'm looking to kind of try to avoid some of those pairs. I'm thinking Worthy's probably going to be around 10-ish%. So getting a couple guys, again, it doesn't have to be 1 or 2% owned, but, just a couple guys in that 10% range can really make a difference.
Allen
and still picking guys I think could be the best play on their
Allen,
teams.
Barkley, Irving, St. Brown, and Worthy. You have 4 flexes, a tight end, a kicker, and a defense left. Steph, where are we going?
So for tight end, I went with the guy that I think is probably the second best tight end in a vacuum with Mark Andrews. Now I'll have to recheck if we think now that Flowers being ruled out, if that
How that affects his projected ownership.
increases his ownership to a point, but I don't know. I still don't think it gets high. I still think he is going to be the third highest owned player on his own team. And that Kelsey, because there's no one else that feels that comfy click, is going to be, because I mean, Lamar and Henry still feel a lot easier. I think a lot of people might just say, oh, I'm off the passing game. That pushes into Henry more. Because I mean, I just don't know how comfortable people still feel with Andrews as in the past.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Just
And if he, I mean, there's no doubting the talent, and I've been saying I think this is the Ravens' year. So to have probably the lead pass catcher on your team playing in what I think is going to be the Super Bowl, I love it for sure. So that's the tight end. Where are we going next, Steph? Are we going to attack the flexes, or do you want to go kicker and defense here?
Let's go ahead and I'll do the flexes.
Fire away.
So I went with Terry McLaurin for my first flex. I am doing a little bit, I guess the him opposite Irving is a little bit of the chalky game there, but I mean, I want to think that if Washington makes the run, that Terry's a big part of it. And I didn't really want to pick a winner on that side, which I do think is going to be popular. I have a few variations of that, but where I landed on, because of I make another little bit of a pivot here coming up, that I felt like Terry still overall isn't going to be one of the highest owned receivers. So
I get it. Totally makes sense.
Then my next flex, which I'll give you a hint. I went all receivers here. You know, I didn't do any more
It's been a formula for winning, so I don't fault you at all.
I made a little bit of a pivot here. I'm going to go with telling myself a story that Minnesota doesn't win, and I went with Addison.
Here we go.
Over J. Jeff. Now, if he won, you could still get there. So, I mean, I'm not totally locked into this, but in my mind, like I was saying earlier, I see it a lot easier to think it's a one game, one off than Justin Jefferson getting shut down over the entire stretch. You know, maybe they sell out to stop him, and, you know, it's been a while, but we've seen Addison get there. We've seen him get those touchdowns. We've seen him.
He would be a number one receiver in a lot of other teams. So the story is not a far-fetched one. I'm totally with you on this. That makes sense. McLaurin and Addison is the first two flexes. Who are the other two flexes you have, Steph?
Then I went with Puka. Like I said, he's hard for me to get away from. He's one of the chalk pieces I was just pretty much willing to eat. And then I decided to do Lad, which is also chalky. So now as I'm looking through, it's one of those things. It's like, I thought I had enough pivots.
you still, I mean, Worthy and Addison, I think are they're solid pivots.
Yeah, that's well, and I mean, like I said, even Andrews, and it's kind of who you're not playing necessarily. You got to look at that also along with who you are playing. So, so then I had Lad, which is also, like I said, going to probably be pretty popular.
And then the kicker and defense are the only ones left we have, Steph, for you.
So I did Houston, which is probably going to be popular, but I do want a good weather for me environment. So that's kind of where I went with that as a soft fade. Then I did defense with Denver. I don't think it's going to be low owned, but I don't think it'll be the most popular. I think most people fully fade Denver. And like I was saying earlier, I think they're a legitimately good defense.
Are we going? I'm sorry to interrupt. Are we going with the Texans or the Broncos defense for your?
Oh, sorry. Broncos defense, Texans kicker.
So we got Kaimi Fairbairn. Okay. All right. I got it.
So we got Fairbairn. Sorry. No. You're
we got
fine.
It now. So we have your lineup, and I'm going to read it back for everybody right now. This is Steph Miller's lineup. which she said is maybe too chalky. It's definitely not as chalky as mine. Josh Allen at quarterback, Saquon Barkley, Bucky Irving at running back, wide receivers, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Xavier Worthy, Terry McLaurin, Jordan Addison, Puka Nacua, Lad McConkey at receiver, Mark Andrews, the tight end, kicker is Kaimi Fairbairn, defensive and special teams is going to be the Denver Broncos. Nick Costantino already ripping my lineup. Chalky with bulky. Yes, I know. And that's why I'm making a move right now. Steph, to close out the show, I'm taking Saquon Barkley out, and I'm putting in Devonta Smith. That is going to be my pivot. So I have Devonta Smith, Zach Ertz in there as my significant pivots. Obviously, James Cook as well, since I have Lamar Jackson. 2 hours flew by. Holy cow. I can't believe it's already 9 o'clock. For everybody who is following you and your content in the offseason, at Steph Miller 57, that's the best way to find out everything you're doing. And obviously, you'll resume the waiver column with legendary upside once the 2025 season rolls around, right?
Yeah, I'll be picking that up. And then I'm also, I work with Pat every week on the Dynasty rankings, and I'll probably look to put out some more articles at some point this
like your
off-season.
Dynasty auction, like your Dynasty auction piece that you published last August. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll get. Yeah, I did. Like I said, yeah, I did an auction strategy. I did a basic startup strategy for auction over there. So yeah, and I just gotta. I'll probably maybe think up some buys or some sells or something fun.
It's always fun. It's why we do this. Steph, tremendous work tonight. Thank you so much. Enjoy the postseason. Thanks for all your work tonight, and let's do this again real soon for sure.
Yeah, sounds great.
I want to thank Steph Miller, our producer, Matt Deutsch. We'll be back at 7 o'clock next Thursday with Draft Sharks Jared Smola talking about the wildcard round and previewing the divisional round. Remember to register for the Fantasy Football Players Championship Playoff Challenge. MyFFPC.com is where to go for that. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next Thursday.
The FFPC Playoff Challenges are back for another season. Just pick 12 players, one from each playoff team, and ride them all the way to the big dance. It's that simple. Over $1.8 million is on the line between the two contests exclusively